Just a disclaimer so everyone understands, my opinion of this movie has nothing to do with my opinion of the situation that happened and is still happening at Tacloban. So don't let those two things intersect, okay? So let's get on with the review. Taklub, also known by its English title Trap, is directed by Brillante Mendoza, written by Honey Lin Joy Alipio, and stars Nora Honor, Julio Diaz, Aaron Rivera, and Lou Veloso. Very simply put, Taklub looks at the lives of these people living in Tacloban 1 year after Typhoon Yolanda. Now here's my thing with Brillante Mendoza. I just don't like him. I've seen a couple of his movies, and I just don't understand the hype. I do think that his movies tend to get very excessive and poverty pornish at times. So I was pleasantly surprised and kind of begrudgingly so when I realized that I did kind of think that Taklub was a pretty good movie. I think it needs a little bit of tightening up on its narrative, but his direction is admittedly very good and there's lots of great acting here as well. Now Taklub is shot in a handheld style with very saturated colors that kind of makes everything look brownish, which does work in this movie to convey that feeling of being washed out and of things being unclean. And the handheld style actually didn't bother me as much as it usually does. There's certain shots where focus is concentrated on the foreground with everything else in the background blurred out. Those shots are really, really cool. It really kind of puts you in the situation with the characters. It kind of makes you feel like what they're going through. The sound in this movie is very naturalistic as well. It's not always the cleanest mix, but again, it works for the subject matter. You know, you can't really expect everything to sound, spick and span. But there are certain scenes, like scenes where a storm is incoming and you can hear like the waves hitting the banks, that are very, very effective. They're suitably terrifying sound-wise. Now, Taklub is a very slow-paced movie that's meant to come off more like a snapshot of Tacloban more than like a straight narrative film. And I do think that this works. I actually like the slow pace here because there was no other way to make a movie about the situation in Tacloban after Yolanda. In fact, it does feel a lot like a documentary, and if you read up on reports and whatnot, you'll know that this project really did start out as documentary. But I will give Brillante Mendoza credit with this, in that it's just like some of Lav Diaz's movies in that you learn how to watch the movie as you watch it. And as I watched Taklub, I really just kind of let the atmosphere kind of wash over me, and I realized it really was more of a mood piece than a straight up narrative story. So this is the kind of movie that you shouldn't really try to scrutinize every single plot detail. It's really the kind of thing that demands that you just let it affect you as a whole. And I do think it's super interesting that the characters here are revealed through little details and lines of dialogue. We don't really get any like flashbacks about what their lives were like before Yolanda. Instead, we really just get these tiny little hints. The acting in this movie is great all around. Nora Nor, once again, is the queen of the restrained performance, and she manages to convey seemingly the grieving of an entire city just through her own two eyes. Julio Diaz is much more expressive in this movie, but he effectively depicts the frustration of being stuck in this trap as it is. Lou Veloso does not have as much screen time as the other two here, but he has this one scene in particular that immediately made tears spring to my eyes. It's just this one look he gives that really hit me like a sledgehammer. You could just really feel his grief. It just felt so real. And like I said, I usually don't like Mendoza's movies, and this changes nothing. Like, I still think those movies that I did watch from him are still kind of excessive and poverty pornish. But I will give credit where credit is due, and he shows a lot of respectful restraint here, and the way he immerses us into this place really feels a lot more deliberate and thought out. This is not just like a propaganda piece, it's not just like a cheap advocacy film, it's really an effective way to let us kind of empathize with these people. As for things I didn't really like about Taklub, for one, while I did say that this was more of a mood piece, it doesn't change the feeling that something is kind of lacking with the characters' arcs. And I understand that this movie isn't really meant to have a natural like closing like other narrative films, but the way things are wrapped up anyway do feel a bit forced, and it only reinforces the idea that this should have been a documentary. And this movie opens with this scene where there's a fire breaking out in a tent, and the entire community kind of comes out to witness this event happening. And in that one scene, you really got this feeling of solidarity among all these people. Unfortunately for me, the movie never really gets that feeling ever again throughout the movie because the individual plot strands are kind of separate from each other, so that was kind of unfortunate. And yes, some of the shaky cam can be a bit too much, which is also unfortunate because they do prove in other parts of the movie that they know how to use it well, but there are some parts where it's just too shaky. With that said, I still do think Taklub is a pretty good movie. I think Brillante Mendoza should stick to the kind of style, although I probably know he won't. But yeah, like, I will give it up to him that this was quite a good movie. Alright, so those are my thoughts on Taklub. Have you guys seen it? What do you think about it? Whether you agree with me or not, please leave me a comment. Let's have a conversation.